I think we can get started, Dean, if that's okay with you. I know we
Yeah,
have a jam-packed agenda. So thank you again, everybody. My name is Kim Tran. I am the Director of Marketing here at Gimmal, and today I'm hosting my really knowledgeable colleague that I'm still learning from 1 month in, Dean Misenhimer, Director of Solutions and Engineering. And today's topic is a topic that we encounter so often, and it's been a quite well requested topic. And so, thank you all for joining us live. Feel free to ask any questions live as we go through the topics and the slides, but please do know that we do have time at the end for Q&A. And so feel free to submit questions. We will hold them until the end, but we will make sure that your questions get answered. Today's webinar will also be recorded, so we will be sending that out within the next 48 hours. And so if you need to drop, if you know a friend who was supposed to join but couldn't, you can forward it on to them. And then, of course, if you experience any technical difficulties, we all know virtual things happen. Please let us know and we can assist you as well. And so about Gimmal, about us, who are we? What do we do? We are an end-to-end information governance solutions. You may have heard of us in the records management space, but as information governance grows more complex across different sources, across repositories, we really offer a comprehensive end-to-end solution to our customers. And so everything from discovering information to disposing and classifying and tagging that information, all the way down to migrating it from physical to digital across the life cycle. And so without further ado, without my spiel, I will now pass it on to Dean to kick us off.
all right. Thank you, Kim. So good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Thanks for carving time out of your day. And so we'll start a little bit about just kind of talking about the agenda, and then we'll get into the meat of the subject today. So the key topics we're going to talk about today: what makes up information governance? What are the key things that kind of go into an information governance solution? We'll kind of set a baseline definition, and then we'll talk a little bit about how do you get there, right? If you're going to Microsoft 365. Well, if you have legacy ECM solutions that you're looking to migrate over, what are the things you need to think about, right? And how do you apply information governance as you do that? What are some of the challenges and insights you need to take into consideration as you begin to implement an information governance program that includes Microsoft 365? And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about how you can most effectively leverage the Microsoft 365 platform, what it can bring you, the benefits that it can bring, and where you may need to supplement some things, what you need to take into consideration as you do that. So those are our key talking points today. As we go through it, please throw questions into the chat panel. We're more than happy to answer questions as they come in, make it more interactive. Always makes it more fun for me and makes me think on my feet a bit. So let's start with what makes up information governance. And we're going to ask a little poll of everybody to begin with. Do you feel like you have a good understanding of what information governance is today? Yes, no, or we're going to give you an out and let you say, I'm not sure as well. And so we'll kind of tabulate the results here in real time, give everybody a chance to see the results here. Votes are coming in. Just about done. And I think that's everybody. So the vast majority of you feel like you have a pretty good handle on it, right? 63% have said yes. 14% have said no. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, you're going to have a better feel for what information governance is. And the 23% who are not sure, hopefully the same thing. Maybe you'll either discover, yeah, I had it nailed, or man, I was way off base. So let's get into it. Go to my next slide here. All right, the poll refuses to leave my screen. There we go. Minor technical difficulties on my side. So let's start with what makes up information governance. This model is provided by edrm.net. It's available on their website, and they graciously share it with anybody who would like to use it. But it kind of breaks down the various parts of information governance. And if you look at it, information governance is a balance of different things, right? It is the business users being able to create value to the business by working, creating information, getting their jobs done. It is IT and security, both supporting the systems that are deployed, as well as enforcing the policies around things like security, right, and access to information. We've certainly become much more aware of that over the last few years and how important that can be. Managing privacy and access to information. And then it's the compliance, right? It's the records management, it's discovery, it is data loss prevention. It's some of those compliance processes that get applied across the information. And so all of these things come into making up an information governance reference model. And if you look at it, there's really three constituencies, and I kind of mentioned those. There's your business users who need information to basically do their job, right? To be able to keep the business running day to day. And what I think is interesting is at any point in time, any of us are business users, whether you're in compliance, whether you're in IT, whether you're in operations, HR, whatever part of the organization you're in, at some point you are considered a business user. You're creating information, you're searching for documents, you're using information, you're sharing and collaborating on that information. We all do that as part of our job. So at some point in time, we're all business users. But IT, as I mentioned, they have to implement the mechanics of how to apply information governance. They have to keep the systems running. They have to maintain the privacy policies. They have to maintain the security on information, access to information, prevent against outside threats. And the legal, risk, and regulatory teams, right, they have to implement the retention schedules. How long should information be kept? How should records be classified? What's a record? What's transitory information? How do we need to manage that? How do we respond to a discovery request? How do we respond to privacy inquiries and things like that? So, they have to be able to apply those policies across all of the information created by the business and managed by IT. And, you see the little yellow arrow there on the subheading at the top. It really is a balancing act. It's all about balancing the value of the information to the organization with the cost of managing that information and the risk that information brings, because you can't go too heavy on any one of those three things. We can lock everything down, make it super secure, make it, difficult to share information externally, but now you can't do your job. It's too hard to get information or to get access to information. It becomes a burden. Or we can implement the most extravagant, beautiful, wonderful, systems out there, but, is that an efficient use of time, money, and resource, right? Because cost isn't just the cost of hardware and software, it's the resource to manage it. It's the time it takes to implement, configure, and set it up as well. So you really have to balance all three of these things together to have an effective information governance program in place. Now, one place as organizations look to move, either look to move to Microsoft 365 or already have and are looking to consolidate, reduce cost, and do other things. An obvious area that a lot of companies look at is they have legacy ECM, content management systems out there that they've had for years, and they, it's like, let's just migrate all that information into Microsoft 365, which, by the way, is a great idea, right? Microsoft 365 is your cloud platform for the future. That's the platform you're going to grow with going forward. So if you can move legacy solutions, ECM platforms into the cloud, all the better. But there are some challenges you need to think about and be aware of as you go through that process and begin to think about moving that information up. The first is simply the complexity, right? ECM systems can be complex. A lot of those systems have been in place at organizations for 10 plus years, 15 plus years, 20 plus years, right? I was working for an ECM company back in the late 90s. I'll date myself a little bit. And those systems have been out there for a long time. The repositories can be extremely large. They can be multiple terabytes or even tens of terabytes in size, right? They store a tremendous amount of information. And not only are they large, but they're complex as far as the type of data that they may contain. It's not all just Word documents and Excel, spreadsheets. It is things like CAD drawings, engineering data. It's drawings with cross-references to other documents. It's things like compound documents where multiple documents come together to make one regulatory submission, for example, or one published document. So there are these things, these complex data types that may come into play as well. And so as you begin to look at migrating information to Microsoft 365, you have to take into account, what do I have out there? How much do I have? And what is it? And what data types do I have beyond just simple things like the format of the document? And then you have to look at security models. Security models in legacy ECM systems can be fairly complex. They can be very granular. Some companies kept things very simple over time, but if the systems have been out there 15, 20 years, it can get a little fractured over time, right? People break inheritance and new security models get rolled out over time. And, thinking through how that's going to map over to your new system now. Oftentimes it's an opportunity to really clean it all up, get a better, more efficient security model in place in Microsoft 365, and then bring your content underneath that. And then there's the planning. It takes time to migrate terabytes of information. So you really have to plan on how you're going to execute that. And as you're moving information to Microsoft 365, you have to take into account throttling. Depending on how you do your migration, throttling can happen. So if you just try and write a bunch of scripts to upload information or let your users do massive drag and drops, you may get throttled. And so technologies to assist with the migration oftentimes can help accelerate that migration because it can do it in ways that aren't going to get you throttled. And then the cost of migration, right? Migrating terabytes of information takes time and resource, and it's going to cost money, right? But what's the cost of doing nothing? What is the cost of your legacy system that you have out there, both not just from license and maintenance costs, which can be quite high on an annual basis for some of these legacy systems, but for the expertise and the time and the resource to manage and maintain those systems. If you have a legacy system that has proprietary scripting languages or technologies that need to be maintained, your resource pool is much smaller than if you need resources to be able to manage the Microsoft stack and to manage the Microsoft cloud. And then lastly, change management. Your users are going to need to buy into changes that you're making, both for migration of ECM and more as we talk about the broader information governance strategy going forward. So you need to make sure that your users are part of the process and that they buy into the change, because if they don't, it just makes your life more difficult, right? So put together a roadmap of how you're going to do this migration, how you're going to move this information over. Talk to the businesses. Make sure you understand how the business units are using the legacy ECM systems. Make sure you understand what they're doing, right? Communicate the change. When is the migration going to happen? Are you going to do a content freeze for a department at some point so they can no longer add information to the legacy system because you're going to begin moving it over? Communicate that information out as to how things are going to change, when the deadlines are, and quite frankly, find quick wins you can deploy in the new system for the user base, and they'll be your biggest advocates, right? Find a quick win, something that brings new value to them, and man, they'll be out there championing things for you. And then make sure the destination is prepared. If you're going to be migrating to Microsoft 365, putting everything into SharePoint or other locations, Do you have the destination ready? Do you have the data types prepared? Do you have an information architecture to receive that information with your site structures, with metadata, content types, with governance policies, right? Do you have all of that ready to bring this information over? Then do an analysis, make sure you understand what you've got, that you didn't miss anything, and begin the migration. And oftentimes that's done in chunks, done department by department. It's done over time because it can take multiple weekends, multiple weeks to do a large scale migration. And we've done, Gimmal's done multi-terabyte migrations for clients that have taken, a couple of months. By the time you do the planning, you do the migration, you work with individual departments to migrate them over. You then do the validation, make sure that you've got log files. You can see that everything came over successfully. Your users will validate the same information is there that, that they had before to do their job. And then you cut over and you go live, right? So have a definitive plan and a roadmap in place on how you're going to achieve this migration, and you'll have success. So let's talk a little bit more about the broader information governance set of challenges and some insights that you can use. Because, all right, you've migrated your ECM system over. Life's great, right? You're done. You don't have to worry about information governance anymore. Well, as you start building an information governance program and putting a plan in place, you probably have more content out there than just what's in the ECM and what's in Microsoft 365. So one of the things you need to think about is, where's your content at? Besides your ECM system and besides SharePoint Online, do you have content in OneDrive? Do you have content in file sharing platforms like Box? What about email? Do users have PST files hidden away on their personal desktops or out on the network file share somewhere? Has Google Workspace been leveraged and used? So you have Gmail and Google Drive at a corporate level out there. Where all do you have content? What about your network file shares? Everyone still has network file shares. And again, those can often be the largest content source that's out there. So how are you going to put in place an information governance program to deal with all of the content that you have? Just because you've migrated an ECM system up to Microsoft 365 doesn't mean everything may be right there for you. So you need to understand that. And then paper records are still out there, right? A lot of users, a lot of our clients still have boxes and folders sitting on shelves in warehouses, both in their own warehouses or offsite with third-party storage providers. So how do you bring that into your program? And then, what's your maturity level with Microsoft 365? Are you just getting started? Are you just using it for email and Teams, or have you deployed it out? Do you have that information architecture in place? Or before you can begin thinking about moving information into it, is there work that you need to do to set up the information architecture, to set up your security model, right? So that you have a structure to bring things into. So evaluate that, right? Take a good look at what's your maturity level with Microsoft 365, both at an IT level and at a business level. Are you going to have to train your users now on how to use SharePoint Online, how to use Teams, how to use OneDrive, right? Is there training and enablement that needs to be done there? And what's your license level? Depending on the license you have, the level of functionality you have will differ with Microsoft 365. So you need to make sure that you understand that. And then information governance maturity, right? What's your maturity there? Do you use file analytic tools today? Do you use eDiscovery tools today? Do you have a records retention program in place? Do you have a records retention schedule in place today? If you don't, you're going to have to start developing that. If you have a records retention schedule that's been around for the last 20 years that was used for all of your physical records, is it 2,000 record classes in length? And do you need to optimize that before you begin trying to apply that to your electronic records? So, what's your maturity with both information governance and the Microsoft platform? And then time and budget, right? Migrating everything seems like a good idea, but if you're, if you have a timeline to get information governance rolled out, you may not have the luxury of migrating everything before you begin implementing information governance. So you may need to look at how you apply discovery, how you apply retention to content that's outside the Microsoft platform. Because again, moving information, doing it in a way that makes sense can take time, can take months, could even take years, depending on the touch points in some of these systems. And if you think scanning, we'll just scan all of our paper records, take a look at the cost of backfile conversion. It takes time, but it also comes at a cost. And so that can be an incremental thing. It can be a day forward thing. And so you have to take that into consideration. And then, excuse me, lastly is, as you do all of this, right, do you have defensibility? Do you have a chain of custody as content may move from system to system? Do you have audit trails and log files of what was done and how things were moved so that you can show exactly what was done? And then in the chat, a question came in. Is there one or more of these that is especially difficult? And that's a great question, by the way. I think understanding your maturity a lot of times is probably a key. Just making sure you're ready to go forward with implementing an information governance program. Do you have the retention schedules? Do you have an understanding of what your requirements are? And do you understand the platform and have the platform ready to receive information? But I think it will vary from organization to organization a little bit. So I think different organizations, any one of those could be the key pillar that they have to deal with. So some insights, how do you help ensure success as you're doing this? Well, remediation is a good start, right? The less information you have to bring under information governance, or the less information you have to migrate to Microsoft 365, quite frankly, the better. Right? So use file analysis tools to identify and remediate rot, whether that's in file shares, whether that's in content service repositories, whether that's even in Microsoft 365 or legacy SharePoint environments. Right? There's a lot of legacy SharePoint still out there. So do remediation. I like to use the analogy of moving from house to house, right? Well, some people move houses and they take their junk drawer, throw it in the box, move to the new house, take the box, dump it in the new junk drawer, and off they go. You haven't really, done any remediation. Other folks, they'll clean out their junk drawer, move to the new house, start a new junk drawer, and 6 months, 9 months, a year later, that junk drawer is full. So remediation is an ongoing effort, right? You don't do it once and then you're done. You need to kind of keep on top of that, because there may be information governance policies for things that need to be more formally managed. There may be simple retention on things that are more transitory, but you want to make sure that that's taken care of as well. Understand the business processes behind all of this content, right? If you understand the business process and you're starting to think about either migrating content or remediating content or putting policies on things, you have to understand how that information is being used. So, depending on the industry that you're in, do you have validated systems or regulated systems, right? So if a system is validated, right, if you're in life sciences, for example, making changes to that system or just arbitrarily moving or changing information in that system suddenly becomes a very big deal, right? You can't just arbitrarily do that. So you need to understand what the content is and how that information gets used. What are the integration points to systems as well? So as you begin to, again, to apply retention, to apply governance policies, data loss prevention policies, how's that information be used and where's it coming from? So for example, if you're an SAP shop, right, if your company uses SAP for, for various aspects of their business, are you archiving content out of your SAP database out to a content repository? If you are, and you want to, you're looking to go kind of everything into Microsoft 365 going forward, what's the solution for being able to archive to Microsoft 365 going forward, especially if you want to retire a legacy system or begin to remediate content out of that, right? So understanding that and understanding the business process workflows that are tied across all of that and how you're going to be able to deploy those process workflows in Microsoft 365. Automate, right? Automation's key. So anything you can do to automate, whether it's migration, whether it's remediation, whether it's application retention and information governance, anything you can do to automate is going to create not just efficiency, but also consistency in how those policies are applied. And ultimately, depending on the tool set you use, you can begin to build this 360-degree view of your information. Because again, if you've got information, even if 80% of your information is in Microsoft 365 data sources, 20% is not. And how do you have that view and one place to go to be able to see your information, right? And then lastly, make sure you understand your information governance requirements. How often do you get discovery requests? Are you subject to things like public record requests? Right? Do you need to be able to keep that information? How can you produce that information? Nowadays, a lot of around privacy, right? So GDPR affects almost every company, because even if you're not based in Europe, you do business in Europe, or even at a state level in the U.S. Right? California has CCPA. Other states are introducing their own privacy acts that are either in flight or beginning to become into law. So how do you respond to a request if Kim calls up Gimmal and says, I want you to remove everything that has, kim.tran@gimmal.com in it, right? I want all my information removed. That's great. We can do that for a lot of information. But what about things that might be records of business transactions? And how do we delineate between what those are and make sure we keep what's a record the way we need to and delete the things we need to from a privacy standpoint? So on to kind of our last topic here is, how do we leverage Microsoft 365 most effectively? And we've got another poll question here. So what is your organization's Microsoft 365 maturity level? Have you rolled it out and not rolled it out at all? Are you just using email and Teams today? Have you deployed SharePoint and some of the other content collaboration capabilities? Or do you kind of consider yourself at a high level where you're really using a lot of the various services that are provided in the platform? So again, we'll give everybody a few moments to go through and answer the questions. It looks like still a few votes trickling in here. We'll give it just a moment. And I think that's good. You wanna share the poll? All right. Well, I think I'll go ahead and share the results here. So you can see the vast majority of it kind of fall in that medium range, right? Using email, using Teams. Obviously, over the last couple of years, with a lot of folks transitioning to working from home, Teams became paramount to getting work done. Using SharePoint, and then about a quarter of you mainly just using email and Teams. So really just the communications features, but still a reasonable amount using a lot of the services that are out there. So thanks for sharing that. So let's move on to the next section. So leveraging Microsoft 365. What can you do with just the platform as a whole, and when might you need to consider third-party products? Well, for content creation, collaboration, and search, that's kind of that medium group that we were talking about there. It provides great capabilities, right? We use it internally. A lot of you use it for email, for chatting in, in Teams, doing meetings. If you've ever had a meeting with Gimmal, it could have been, very well could have been done through Teams. OneDrive for draft content, for storing personal content, email for collaboration, and hopefully not for personal document management. And then other tools that are a little less used, but are out there and can actually provide good value in the right use case, like Planner for project management, or Delve to be able to suggest and recommend information to you around what you're doing, what you've been working on, and what other related information others have been working on. Right. So if you haven't looked at that, take a look at it. But a lot of great tools for content creation, collaboration, and then the search engine in Microsoft 365, right, provides a lot of great capabilities. And now Microsoft Purview. If you're not familiar with Purview, Microsoft announced Purview back in a blog post in April, and it's really a rebranding and a bringing together of a lot of the products that were in Azure Purview and in the Microsoft 365 compliance portfolio. So things like records management, labels, eDiscovery, sensitivity labels, data loss protection. There are, if you go read the blog post, if you search for Microsoft Purview in blog, you'll see there are about over 20 products that kind of fall under the Purview brand now. But it is a set of tools all about governance and records management capabilities across the platform that affects the data and content services within Microsoft 365. And then there's the Power Platform, right, that lets you really develop process automation, right, workflows, business process automation, to create apps, form-based applications, applications that interact with the with the workflows, again, across the content services and external systems, right? So you can integrate external data sources with the Power Platform and have kind of these common workflows. So going back to something we talked about earlier, if you're moving off of legacy platforms, and one of those legacy platforms is what has really been your predominant business process management platform in the past, how do you bring that now to the Power Platform? What can you do? Can you do all of the same things? What new things can you do using Power Automate or Power Apps, and now bringing Power BI to the, using Power BI as well, right? So a lot of great capabilities here, but you may still need add-on products in addition to what Microsoft 365 brings to the table if you need things like very broad discovery. So if you still have file shares out there, if you have PST files on user desktops, if you have legacy SharePoint environments, right? You may need to be able to run common file analytics. Go find all the PII data, or go find kim.tran@gimmal.com and every file and every email across every data source that I have, right? Or I need to be able to run a discovery search and create a collection across multiple data sources. We talked about physical records earlier. If you have physical records and you need to continue to manage physical records, and a lot of organizations still do, right? I've heard the paperless office since, kind of going back to that 90s reference, I've heard the paperless office since the beginning of my career in the content management world, and it's still not here, and I don't think it ever will be, to be quite frank. Paper's going to be around, and you may have physical records, and if you do, you need to look at a way that you can manage your physical records, because there's no capabilities in the platform for doing that. And if you need advanced records management capabilities, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, kind of beyond what Microsoft delivers out of the box, right? You may need add-on products to really implement a complete information governance program. So when should you consider add-on products? You need to manage information governance policies across multiple content sources, including Microsoft 365, right? I have the network file shares. I have the desktop endpoints, right? We have a lot of clients that want to be able to run eDiscovery searches and be able to do file analytics looking for PII data, PHI data, or other sensitive data all the way out to the desktop, whether that's a Windows desktop or a Mac desktop, right? So discovery tools, third-party discovery tools can do that type of analysis from a central dashboard, right? So you want centralized information governance. You don't want to have one system for all of your Microsoft 365 data and another system for all of your other data. You want that central dashboard. So I can create a search that will look for, whether it's pattern-based searching, whether it's terms-based, whatever it may be, but I can go out and I can execute that search across multiple data sources, have one set of reports, one view of that information, back to that 360-degree view of what you have out there. And my searches are consistent, right? Again, so kind of back to that defensibility and consistency. You're showing you're doing the same thing the same way all the time. From a records management standpoint, you've got a large file plan. You have a hierarchical file plan where things are organized and nested, and you need to manage it. You need to manage potentially, a few hundred record classes, hopefully not a few thousand. Hopefully you've optimized it, and you need to organize that in a way that's more structured and be able to apply security so that, Kim can see all the marketing records, Dean can see all the sales records, right? And you can put that type of security in place on your file plan, not just on your records. Or you have multi-stage retention life cycles. I need to be able to take a record through multiple stages in its retention life cycle. I need to be able to manage a record transfer to a state or a federal archive. I need things like extended audit trails that last for years. When a record's been disposed, 5 years later, do I have the audit trail that shows what happened to that record and how it was disposed of and who approved it? And I have the destruction certificate to back that up, right? And I have physical records, right? We've kind of talked about that. The other time you might need to consider add-on products is going back to the licensing, right? Understand the type of license your organization has for Microsoft 365. If you only have an E3 license, or if you're in government, a G3, or you're going to have limited functionality around records management and around information governance and all of the things that that I mentioned earlier with Purview, right? You really have to be at an E5 level across the organization to have full access to that functionality. And even then, if you need some of the things I mentioned in the previous bullet, that still might not be enough, right? And a lot of organizations have mixed environments. Some of the users have E5 licenses because of their role, but not every user in the organization does. So how do you now manage that? Who can do records, who can't? How do you have consistent enforcement of your policies? So, if any of these things that I've talked about apply to your organization, you probably need to at least consider supplementing what you're doing with Microsoft 365 with some third-party products. And so let's take it with that to our summary, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Microsoft 365 provides a breadth of content-related services for the enterprise. It's incredibly powerful with what it delivers in a cloud-based platform, and it does it very effectively. In my career, I will absolutely say it is one of the few platforms that can touch every single desktop in a company. There are not many applications that make that claim, right? It can touch every single user in your company. If your information governance requirements are pretty straightforward, lightweight, maybe to midweight, if all of your content is, if you're kind of starting fresh with information governance, with content services and Microsoft 365 as your platform, it may provide everything that you need, right? Usability is one of the things that you have to look at as well. But for more mature organizations where they have advanced information governance use cases, whether it's records, whether it's eDiscovery, whether it's other aspects of information governance, where the management of that system and the management of the information governance program versus the platform versus the content creation. Think back to our 3 constituencies in the very first slide. right? If things are delegated out to different organizations, right, you may need tools that are a little more purpose-built so that your records management team is working in a UI dedicated for records managers, or your eDiscovery team is working in a tool that speaks to their language, right, and presents an interface that is familiar with them, versus your IT team working, more in some of the interfaces that are native to Microsoft 365. And we'll talk to clients, and they'll say, can't we just script this? Can't we do customization and write scripts? And because there's a lot of Microsoft talent out there. And yes, you can to do some of this. You could write PowerShell scripts, and you could build Power Automation flows, and you could build Power Apps, to fill a lot of the gaps yourself. But two things I'll mention there that you need to be aware of. One, you're now in the software maintenance business, right? So you have to keep those applications running. And if your users come in, your legal team comes in on Monday morning, or your users come in on Monday morning, and suddenly things have been disposed of, and users are like, where's my content? Or your compliance team comes in and information is suddenly not available that should be, or same thing, information's not in the state that it should be, right? Can you respond to that quickly enough? And second, by the very nature of what it is, Microsoft 365 is a cloud-based platform. It is going to change. It is going to get updated. New features are going to roll out. Things will change. New features will be added. Old features will evolve, and that will break things. And so if you have a lot of scripts, if you have a lot of Power Apps, right, again, you're kind of in the software maintenance business now, and you got to make sure that you have the time and the resource, if you want to go down that path, to consistently be able to respond to your constituency out there. All right, so that's the biggest warning on the last thing, going down the customization path. And that's why, looking at packaged software, because now that becomes the software vendor's responsibility to respond and to make sure that changes are made and to stay up to date with changes in the platform, and plan for those. So with that takes us through our last slide. Kim, I'll let you kind of host the questions here, maybe.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dean. So as we mentioned, if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat, and or feel free to follow up with us after the webinar. Dean's email is shared here, and we got our first question from Jean here. Does or would Gimmal do a web of how Purview works across the functionality? We can answer that live, Dean, or we can follow up with Jean if it takes a longer, more substantive answer.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good suggestion for a future topic, I think. Probably get somebody smarter than me. Maybe bring our chief strategy officer in, and just kind of talk about that in a little more depth, because Purview is new to a lot of folks, and it does bring together a lot of different things that are in the platform from both the Microsoft 365 side, the Azure side. So I think that would be an informative webinar.
We have another question coming in from David. Are there broad-based information governance plans, or are they usually tailored to a company?
Good question. I think there's probably kind of I don't know if there's a canned plan, but the approach is probably pretty consistent. But every company is going to be unique in certain aspects. So you're always going to take, even if you take kind of a base plan or you work with a consultant to help you, a consultant's going to come in with kind of a methodology and a way that they approach things. But, that will then have to be tailored to a specific company's need. Are you regulated? How mature are you with the platforms, right? What's your resource level to be able to implement? Because I could design the most elegant, most full function information governance plan, But if you don't have staff and resources that are able to implement and maintain that, it's not going to be successful. Not because the plan isn't great, because you just don't have the resources to do it. And so you scale it back, or you hit, you scale it up over time. So good question. I see another one here. Ideal information governance employee background. That's a great question. I think it could really be any of the things you mentioned, right? A library scientist, a data scientist. Librarians are all about cataloging, about retaining, about getting that is their job. Archivists, kind of the next stage of that. Data scientists are kind of doing the same thing around more structured data versus the unstructured data in the content world. Any of those could morph into. A lot of records managers that I've met have library science backgrounds, right? On the implementation side, obviously somebody who has, background in, if you're going down the Microsoft 365 route, somebody who knows the platform has a huge step up. Or somebody who's been in records and information management or information governance, eDiscovery throughout their career becomes a valuable resource. So I don't think there's, working in high tech all these years, I have met people from all different backgrounds, all different experiences. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to the level of curiosity, their area of focus, as to who makes the right person.
So another question here from Tracy, and this I think goes back to our migration roadmap earlier on in the webinar, but are there, from your experience, are there any specific challenges that you see organizations struggle with across the board when it comes to migrating?
Yeah, I think some of the things we've seen, one is just volume, not understanding, if you're moving 3, 5, 7, 10 terabytes of content, how much time that can take to do it in kind of a methodical approach, so you make sure you have full fidelity on the migration. I think second is making sure you bring the information over in a way that you maintain the fidelity of the information. So, the metadata, the structure that I have in the old system, am I just replicating that in the new system? Or, because if you're moving from, I'll use some examples, a Documentum or a content server or a FileNet system, those systems kind of operated on a cabinet folder, subfolder level. SharePoint operates on more of a site structure level. Very different. So how do you map that over? How do you now optimize for the new platform, and yet at the same time not create such a wildly different environment that your users can't find anything, right? And your users become extremely frustrated with the new environment. So thinking that through and making sure that you've engaged the users in that conversation. How would they use the information in the new system? And lastly, if you're using information governance tools in your old platform, if you're doing records management or anything else, as you bring the information over, are you making sure you're bringing the right information over so that in the new system, right, when you move it to Microsoft 365, whether you're using the native tools or you're using third-party tools alongside Microsoft 365, you can pick things like the retention lifecycle up at the same point in the retention. You're not resetting the clock on the retention of something, because that creates massive issues as well, right? So maintaining that fidelity as you come over. I think those are some of the key things to think about.
Awesome. And then Bridget asked, we have a large amount of SharePoint sites and we need to apply lifecycle management. Is it best to set up a new site with all the retention labels and such, and then migrate the content over to the new site versus applying the rules to a live site? I feel like that's a heavy question, heavy hitter for you, Dean.
Yeah, I have to think about that one for a sec. You know, you can kind of go either way. You would obviously want to have, and I'm just kind of thinking really right off the top of my head here, you would want the labels set up on, the labels need to at least be defined and exist, you know, in Microsoft 365. Now, whether those are being auto-applied when you, based on the location that you put something. So if I move a bunch of content into my sales operations library, does it automatically just inherit a label based on that? Or during the migration, do I actually use my migration tool to map something like a record classification from the old system to a label in the new system, right? Because that becomes an option as well versus it just inheriting based on location. I may want to map to the label settings as I do the migration based on the state of the document in its old system and the data it had associated with it. So there's not a hard yes or no answer there as to the right way to do it. There's some options there. Are there any more questions we want to get to? I know that there are a lot of great questions in here. Let's see, file. I see somebody's asking about recommendations on file mapping. Not 100% sure what you're asking for there. Yeah, that one might be, if you can provide a little more color through an email later on after the webinar, feel free to shoot that over and we'll try and get you a good answer. I don't want to make an assumption on the wrong thing. Yeah, and then the last question we'll hit here. Someone just asked if we could expand on some of the shortcomings around kind of complex records management. You know, I mentioned you know, things like the file plan management, right? So being able to have a fairly large file plan that is nested in nature, where I can have things set up in a hierarchical structure, where I can set some policies on record classes and record categories at a parent level and have all the children inherit that from the parent. I can have retention life cycles rather than just stringing together a bunch of individual actions. I could have a retention life cycle that could do something like, once the record has been discovered and classified, wait 30 days from the date it was captured. If no changes are made, now declare that record and lock it. Now keep it for 10 years from its creation date, and I'm using simple examples. Keep it for 10 years from its creation date, unless somebody supersedes that record. And if they do, change the retention to be only 2 years from the supersede date, right? Being able to build retention life cycles that can have some of those types of capabilities in them, or you know, visibility into you know, into kind of a singular inbox for a records manager. So they have one place they can easily see everything that's eligible for disposition, coming up for disposition, and do bulk approvals on those or individual approvals, you know, and have you know, kind of structured approval workflows. Those are some of the kind of things you get into, as well as being able, for example, to filter the records that a records manager could see, right? Kim's the records manager for half the business. I'm the records manager for the other half of the business. We can only see the records that we should have access to, for both for retention, for approval, for disposition, even for reporting, things like that. So we've kind of hit the end of our time. I know there's still some questions out there, so we'll take a look at those and try and get you some answers. Man, a lot of great interaction. That always makes it a lot more fun. So Kim, any closing thoughts here before we wrap it up?
Yeah, no, thank you again, everybody, for joining us live. I know we had a lot of questions. So as Dean mentioned, we will follow up on the questions that, you know, required a longer answer and a more nuanced answer than answering those live, and we'll follow up with folks. But again, thank you, everybody, for joining, and we will be following up soon and hope to see you at a future webinar. Thank you again, Dean, for hosting, and and sharing your knowledge.
Happy to do it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.